the ideal situation is to get maximum amount of experience while your odometer is still relatively low. So if you can fight multiple fights in 6 months or a year, get yourself ready, go to a big international tournament against the world's best, fight multiple fights in one event, like the Pan Am's coming up or the Worlds. And if you are successful in that, then you have a really educated decision to turn pro and not recreational as an amateur. Because right now it's still, in boxing, if you have like one loss on your record, that's career changing. Luckily for MMA, it's not like that right now, but eventually it's going to be like that because the skill levels are going up and up and up and up and up. And then if you look at, what I said before, if you look at the UFC, how many American UFC champs do we have right now? It used to be all American and Brazilian, right?
Right.
I was all American. Now we can't even pronounce the names of most of the UFC champions because they're going through this progression of youth, robust amateur program. They're still learning their mistakes as an amateur, where they do have some degree of a safety net. They're not getting thrown to the wolves once you're a pro, and it's helping a lot. I mean, you can see the rest of the world, not the whole world, but a lot of other countries, what they're doing, they found the recipe, which we don't have in the US.
Very interesting. I think I could probably stick on this topic for quite some time, but I'm curious to know, how does California differ from, say, the community in Texas and Florida as far as that amateur scene? Because you mentioned Florida, Texas, and California as having a really, I guess, robust amateur community. How do they differ?
Yeah, I mean, well, instead of trying to focus on the entire country, we really are focusing on the three, what we believe is a hotbed areas. We have regional coordinators that are tied to multiple events that want to have a successful US program. So we have 3 guys, but it's usually a big force multiplier in reaching out to fighters, because those 3 guys have, are tied to well over 100 events a year, well over. But Florida, so for Florida, and all 3 are different, totally different. So I'll start with Florida. Florida has maybe 20 to 30 different amateur sanctioning groups. It's like the Wild West. There's so many different groups there. Some of them work together, some of them work against each other. But there's also, it's very easy to work with the state to have a professional fights there. So there's a lot of pro-am. So there are a lot of amateur competitions there, but the time spent as an amateur is very short in Florida because there's so many professional opportunities. And so the really high level guys in Florida don't stay amateur for that long. Now, if you go to Texas, the state is the one-stop shop. They run everything. And it's also like that as well, where, that since they run everything, when you have an amateur fight, it's usually a pro-am. So just like Florida, they don't really stay amateur for that long. They'll turn pro a little bit faster, but the state runs it all. Now, California, there's one organization that runs all the amateur, Camo. And I think if you measured them, they're probably the biggest athletic commission in the country because the amount of events they do. And because they do so many events, there's so many opportunities for them to fight. And there's so many promoters that are running Camo events, there are less professional events. So I believe that makes the level of the amateur program in California a little bit higher than other places, because other places they'll turn professional quicker. There's no way to really measure this because there's very little cross-country competition. So I don't know if my theory is correct, but just from what I see, as a fan, that's what I believe is going on.
Yeah, now it's interesting. Do you know if there's any so there's no cross-state competition, but is Camo, do they share their best practices with other states in order to kind of augment their ability to, to standardize these sports? Is there any of that sort of engagement happening?
Yeah, I really think for all three of those states, they do put together their best practices as far as regulation, regulatory, and safety.
Right.
And I know Camo is probably a little bit stricter because they can be, because unlike Florida, if I don't like the sanctioning group, I got 30 others to pick from, right? So you basically are there to please the customer, the fighter, and the promoter.
Right.
Where in California, they don't really need to please the customer. It's like, this is the way it's going to be done, and this is the way we're doing it. And then Texas, it may be because the commission does pro-am, they're going to maybe put a little more emphasis on pro, right? Because, that's so they all do their best practices, but I think the structure in California, I'm in California, it's maybe not the best for promoters, in a business sense. Maybe it's even rougher for the fighters, but as far as the big picture, for really strict regulations and really building strong amateur fighters, because that's all they focus on. It's like, you guys know, In-N-Out Burger. I don't know if when people come to California, they want In-N-Out. So that's all they make, just a hamburger. There's not, chicken or whatever. So that's all they do.
Right.
They just focus on amateur. There's nothing else. But again, all three states are what I consider the powerhouse in the U.S. for amateur and professional MMA.
This is very interesting. If you don't mind, I want to ask another follow-up on this topic. Are there any regional, like outside of just those three major, powerhouses? What about the Northeast and the Midwest? Do you guys have affiliates there in New York or even in Minnesota? Or
yeah, I mean, basically what we did is instead of trying to conquer the entire world, we conquered not conquer, but we're focusing on three really strong regions and
right.
three very strong individuals that have reached beyond, their own states. So, but what we're learning, and we're new to this, is having a great fighter is great, obviously, but there's a lot more to it. Not really the business sense of it, but I don't know how to term this, but you may have the greatest fighter in the world, but if you can't get him to the cage, it doesn't really help.
Right.
So we really need people that are able to get their medicals done, get their paperwork in, get the registration done properly. It's difficult. Some of these guys are really good fighters, but those tasks are not always easy for fighters to handle. And that can be a detriment to our pool of athletes. So what we want is to have these regional coordinators not only get us really good fighters, but vet these fighters, make sure they're going to make it to the cage, get with the program, because it's not just showing up to fight, as anybody knows. It's making weight, it's getting your paperwork done, your medicals done, getting there, in a timely manner. Stuff like that is very important. We're talking professionalism, even
right.
at the amateur, you got to be a professional as far as your obligations.